Ever feel like you're paying taxes on the very air you breathe?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's a bit like that in India right now, especially for the shrinking middle class.
Definitely a lot of pressure there.
We're diving deep into how India's tax system is impacting its middle class
Right.
and why millionaires are choosing to say sayonara, booking those one-way tickets out.
It's a trend we can't ignore.
We've got expert analysis for this deep dive, budget breakdowns, on-the-ground
Oh,
reports,
the whole shebang.
even a bit of Aristotle thrown in for good measure.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll understand the pressures on India's middle class, the factors driving the wealthy to leave,
Right.
and ultimately what this all means for India's future.
Oh, it's fascinating.
So one thing that really jumped out from the research was that India's individual income tax revenue
Okay.
now surpasses its corporate tax revenue.
Really?
That's pretty unusual for a developing nation,
Yeah, I would say so.
and it really highlights that heavy reliance on personal income tax.
It's intriguing, isn't it? It's almost like the government is giving you a pat on the back for earning and then immediately taking a big chunk back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And only 2% of Indians actually pay income tax.
Oh, wow.
But those who do get hit with taxes on both their earnings
Right.
through income tax, but also their spending through the goods and services tax, or as is commonly known, GST.
Ah, the double whammy. You've hit a crucial point there. This double taxation is a significant burden. And some experts even argue that this heavy reliance on personal income tax, it's just not sustainable, not for a developing economy like India.
Yeah. And it's not just theoretical. The data paints a very stark picture. We're seeing the middle class actually losing income, while the richest 20% are enjoying a 40% increase.
It's almost like a squeeze from both sides, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. One report even called it the middle class meltdown.
Ooh, that's a catchy phrase.
And, it's not just about numbers on a balance sheet. This is about real people struggling
Right.
to make ends meet, to educate their children, afford health care.
It's about dreams being put on hold.
Absolutely. This brings us to a fascinating parallel with Aristotle's philosophy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, you see, he believed that a strong middle class is the backbone of a stable and just society. And his warning about the dangers of wealth disparity, where either the rich or the poor dominate,
Yeah.
seems incredibly relevant to what's happening in India today.
It's almost like this ancient wisdom echoing through the centuries, isn't it?
I love that.
But let's bring it back to present-day India. We're seeing this shrinking middle class,
Right.
but also a simultaneous exodus of millionaires.
The two seem to be connected, don't they?
In fact, India ranks second globally in millionaire migration. What's driving this exodus, and how does it tie back to this middle-class squeeze?
Well, while high taxes are definitely a factor, it's not the whole story.
Oh, okay.
The sources we've reviewed also highlight concerns about the quality of life. Things like pollution,
Yeah.
inadequate infrastructure, and safety concerns as well.
Mm.
We're talking about individuals who have the resources to live comfortably anywhere in the world, choosing to leave India. That sends a pretty strong message, wouldn't you say?
It certainly raises questions about the confidence or lack thereof in the country's future
Yeah.
among those who have the most to lose or perhaps the most to gain by leaving.
Yeah.
And this exodus, ironically, further shrinks the tax base,
Right.
potentially leading to an even heavier burden on the middle class that remains.
A vicious cycle.
Uh,
So we've got a shrinking middle class, a millionaire exodus, and a government that seems to be focused on infrastructure spending, but offering very little in the way of tax relief for the middle class.
Okay.
How does this all connect? And what are the long-term implications?
Well, that's where the situation gets even more complex.
Okay.
You see, the government's focus on infrastructure, while important, hasn't necessarily translated into a better quality of life for the average citizen.
Right.
And this disconnect is fueling a sense of frustration, disillusionment, especially among the urban middle class.
Okay, so we've got a shrinking middle class, a millionaire exodus, and a government seemingly focused on infrastructure spending. What does this mean for the average Indian? And what can be done to address these challenges?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there are no easy answers.
Right.
But understanding the complex interplay of these factors, the tax system, the economic climate, and the choices individuals are making, that's the first step towards finding solutions.
I completely agree.
One thing that really stood out to me in the research, this contrast, like inside people's homes where there's minimal government involvement, life might be pretty comfy.
Right.
But the moment you step outside,
Yeah.
you're hit with the reality of poorly maintained roads, inadequate public transport, and of course, the ever-present pollution.
Yeah, it's like a tale of two cities.
Exactly. Inside versus outside.
And it's not just anecdotal either. We saw some pretty stark visuals in the reports. Delhi's overflowing landfills, infrastructure mishaps in Mumbai,
Oh, yeah.
where a flyover and a bridge just don't connect.
Oh, wow.
And Bengaluru's just crater-filled roads.
And what's frustrating is this isn't necessarily a lack of resources, right? The government is clearly investing in infrastructure.
Right.
But there seems to be this gap, this accountability gap. Like, are these investments being managed effectively? And are they truly benefiting the average citizen?
Yeah, it's like they're saying, we'll build it, but we're not guaranteeing it'll work.
Aha, exactly.
And then there's this whole issue of transparency. One commentator even quipped that NDA now stands for no data available.
Oh, that's good. This lack of transparency, it's a serious concern. We came across instances where the government was either unable or just unwilling to provide data on critical issues.
Like what?
Oh, things like offshore shell companies, farmer deaths during the protests.
Right, right.
If citizens don't have access to reliable data, how can they possibly hold their government accountable?
Yeah, it just breeds skepticism. And speaking of skepticism, several sources pointed to a growing resentment among the urban middle class about the fact that agricultural income remains untaxed.
Yeah. That's a politically sensitive issue for sure.
Yeah.
But it feeds into this feeling of unfairness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The middle class, already burdened by taxes on their income and their spending, they see this segment of society that's completely exempt from this burden.
It's a bit like, wait, we're the only ones paying here.
Yeah. It raises questions about equitable distribution and whether the system is truly designed to benefit everyone. One commentator even drew a parallel to the French Revolution, suggesting that if the needs of the middle class are consistently ignored, it could lead to social unrest.
Whoa, okay. A bit dramatic, perhaps.
Maybe.
But it highlights the potential consequences of a disgruntled and shrinking middle class.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, is India heading towards a scenario where the middle class, the engine of economic growth,
Right.
begins to lose faith?
Yeah.
What happens if they no longer see a future for themselves in India?
That's a good question. We already see the millionaires leaving. But imagine a scenario where the middle class, who don't have the same resources,
Right.
also start feeling like they have no stake in the system.
What does that mean for the country's social fabric?
Exactly.
The consequences could be far-reaching. It's not just about the loss of tax revenue, right?
Yeah?
It's about a potential brain drain, erosion of a skilled workforce, and a decline in consumer spending,
Wow.
all of which could have this ripple effect on the economy.
It's like this slow-burning fuse, and we need to figure out how to diffuse it. But the budget breakdowns we've analyzed, they don't offer much hope for immediate relief.
Right, yeah.
The focus still seems to be on infrastructure and fiscal deficit reduction,
Okay.
with very little attention to actually addressing the issues that are impacting the middle class.
Like,
Stagnant salaries, rising costs, lack of social safety nets.
yeah. And the irony is, attracting foreign investment is important, but focusing solely on that while neglecting the needs of the domestic middle class, it could backfire. You can't build a strong, sustainable economy without a thriving middle class.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
It's like building a fancy house on a shaky foundation.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? What are the potential solutions? And is there any reason for optimism?
The solutions are complex. They require a multi-pronged approach. But one thing's clear.
What's that?
The government needs to acknowledge the vital role of the middle class
Yeah.
and start implementing policies that address their concerns.
This means looking beyond infrastructure spending
Yes.
and focusing on creating opportunities for economic mobility,
Right.
improving the quality of life,
Yeah.
and fostering a sense of hope, of optimism among the middle class.
Absolutely. It's about making them feel like they are valued partners in nation building, not just a source of tax revenue.
Exactly. And a crucial part of this is restoring trust, accountability. The government needs to be transparent about how tax money is being used.
Right.
Address those concerns about equitable distribution and demonstrate a genuine commitment to the well-being of the middle class.
I couldn't agree more. One commentator suggested a shift towards a sattvic society.
Sattvic.
It's a concept from Hindu scriptures that emphasizes virtue, balance, and a focus on collective well-being.
Interesting.
It aligns with Aristotle's vision, doesn't it? A just and stable society built on a strong middle class. It suggests a need to move away from this emphasis on individual gain and towards a system that prioritizes the collective good.
That sounds like a pretty radical shift. But are there any practical steps that can be taken to actually move in that direction?
Certainly. Reforming the tax system is a good place to start.
Okay.
Many experts argue that the current system, which relies so heavily on personal income tax, it's just not sustainable and it's inequitable.
So we're talking about potentially reducing the burden on the middle class
Yeah,
and exploring alternative sources of revenue.
precisely. There's also a need to revisit the GST and address the issue of corporates receiving input tax credits, while individuals do not. It's about creating a fairer, more balanced system.
And beyond taxation, what other measures could make a difference?
Well, investing in areas that directly impact the quality of life.
Such as?
Education,
Mm.
healthcare, public transport, environmental protection.
Mhm.
These aren't just expenses, they're investments in the future of the country and in the well-being of its citizens.
It sounds like a tall order. But ultimately, the future of India hinges on a strong and thriving middle class. The question is, will the government recognize this and take the necessary steps to ensure that future?
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it feels like we're really at a crossroads. The choices made today, they will have a ripple effect
Yeah.
on India's future. So what can the government do to change course, to actually
Well,
ensure a brighter future for its middle class?
I think it goes beyond just government action. It's about this collective shift in mindset. One commentator even argued that, the leaders on top, they're actually a reflection of the people, the people they represent.
Oh, interesting.
So if citizens demand better governance, accountability, a more equitable society,
Yeah.
the leaders are going to have to respond.
So it's a call to action for every citizen to be more engaged,
Exactly.
hold their leaders accountable, and really demand that better future for India.
Precisely. The power, it ultimately rests with the people. India's future isn't predetermined. It's shaped by the choices its citizens make, individually and collectively.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought. The future is in our hands.
Uh-huh.
But there's a lot of work to be done. Where should people even begin?
Start by staying informed, engaging in dialogue, and demanding better from those in power. Remember, the middle class is the backbone of any thriving society. Its strength is vital for a nation's progress.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring these issues. Dig deeper, research, and form your own conclusions. What other factors are at play, contributing to India's economic landscape? What policy changes could make a real difference?
And most importantly, what role will you play in shaping India's future? The answers, they lie within each of us.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into India's middle-class squeeze. We hope you found this exploration insightful, thought-provoking.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a brighter tomorrow.